Britain is in decline, and Nigel Farage is making sure everyone knows it. Standing before a packed audience at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship (ARC) conference in London, he wasted no time in delivering one of his most scathing attacks yet, this time aimed squarely at Chancellor Rachel Reeves and the Labour government. The country, according to Farage, is sinking into a state of misery, and it's all thanks to a leadership that lacks vision, optimism, and most importantly, the courage to take bold action. And the worst part? Farage claims that Reeves is so uninspiring, so lacking in conviction, that listening to her makes him want to reach for the cry tissues. A brutal jab, yes, but one that struck a chord with the audience, many of whom share his frustration at the way Britain is being run. Farage painted a bleak picture of a country that has lost its sense of self, its optimism, and its willingness to believe in a better future. A country where ambition is demonized, where hard work is no longer encouraged, and where young people are being set up for failure. It wasn't always like this, he reminded the audience. There was a time, in the late 1980s and much of the 1990s, when Britain was a place of optimism, a country where success was celebrated rather than resented. But that spirit has been crushed under years of bad leadership, first from the Conservatives and now from Labour. The result? A nation where over 1 million young people have been signed off work with depression since the pandemic, where birth rates are falling because young people no longer see a future for themselves, and where the economy is suffocating under a tax burden not seen since the 1940s. Farage's argument wasn't just about policy, it was about something deeper, something cultural. Britain, he claimed, has lost its way. The country has forgotten what made it strong in the first place, its values, its work ethic, and at the core of it all, its Judeo-Christian foundation. He argued that without a return to those principles, no amount of economic policies or political manoeuvring would be enough to reverse the decline. His solution? A complete 180-degree shift in attitude. The British people, he insisted, need to stop being told that success is something to be ashamed of. They need to be reminded that hard work is good, that making money is good, and that ambition is not a dirty word. But Labour, with its high tax policies and obsession with redistribution, is sending the exact opposite message. And what about the Conservatives? If anyone thought Farage would spare them, they were mistaken. In his eyes, they are just as much to blame. After 14 years in power, they have presided over record-high taxes, mass legal and illegal immigration, and a total failure to address the crises facing the country. They have embraced net-zero policies that have done nothing but cripple British industry while outsourcing pollution to countries like India and China. They have been weak on immigration, unwilling to take the bold steps necessary to stop small boats from crossing the Channel. And, perhaps worst of all, they have done nothing to instill a sense of national confidence in the British people. Kemi Badenoch, a rising star in the Conservative Party, recently took a shot at Farage, dismissing him as someone who talks big but delivers nothing. His response? A brutal takedown of the entire Conservative establishment. The right, he declared, is not split in Britain because the Tories are not on the right in any meaningful way. They have abandoned conservative principles in favour of political correctness, globalist policies, and a fear of upsetting the status quo, and the polling backs him up. Only 10% of voters see the Conservatives as strong, while 61% see them as weak. Reform UK, on the other hand, is performing significantly better in the eyes of the public, with 49% of voters believing it has a clear sense of purpose. But while Britain faces an internal crisis, the situation beyond its borders is even more alarming. Ukraine is on the brink, and yet Britain's leadership is failing to step up in any meaningful way. European leaders recently gathered in Paris to discuss the ongoing crisis, but Prime Minister Keir Starmer's approach has been widely criticised as weak and premature. Even German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has suggested that Starmer is acting too soon, raising fears that Britain's commitment to Ukraine's security is faltering at a time when strength and resolve are needed most. The message from European leaders is clear. The UK must step up. Former US President Donald Trump and other international figures have urged Britain to take a stronger stance in supporting Ukraine, warning that any hesitation now will only embolden Russian aggression. But the Labour government, far from taking decisive action, appears to be waiting on the United States for guidance. Transport Secretary Heidi Alexander admitted as much, stating that the UK's approach must be coordinated with Washington. That kind of leadership, or lack thereof, is exactly what Farage has been warning about. The government claims it is committed to increasing defence spending to 2.5% of GDP as soon as the financial and economic situation allows, but with Britain's economy already in a dire state, it's anyone's guess when that will actually happen. In the meantime, the government is conducting a strategic defence review, assessing military capabilities and potential spending needs. But for critics like Farage, this is just another example of the government dragging its feet while the world becomes more dangerous. And so, Farage's message was clear. Britain is at a crossroads. The country cannot afford to continue down this path of decline, weakness, and mediocrity. It needs bold leadership, a radical change in mindset, and a willingness to embrace ambition and success rather than punish it. Labour is failing, the Conservatives have already failed, and unless something changes soon, Britain will be lost to stagnation and decline. The audience at the ARC conference gave him a standing ovation. Whether one agrees with him or not, it's impossible to ignore the power of his message. Britain is in trouble, and for many, Farage is the only one speaking the truth about why. Farage's speech sent shockwaves through the room, but outside that conference hall, the political establishment was scrambling. Labour MPs dismissed him as a fearmonger, while the Conservatives pretended not to hear him at all, perhaps because his words hit too close to home. But here's the reality. Farage's warnings aren't just political grandstanding. The numbers back him up. Britain is falling behind, not just economically, but culturally. Productivity is stagnating, businesses are closing, and young people are checking out of the system entirely. The welfare state is ballooning, and with it, a generation of disillusioned young adults who have been conditioned to believe that there's nothing worth working for anymore. Farage hit on something that no other politician is willing to say out loud. The crisis is deeper than policies or budgets. This is a crisis of national spirit. The country is stuck in a perpetual cycle of negativity, fed by a government that seems to believe Britain's best days are behind it. Labour doesn't want to fix it. They thrive on it. A country that's demoralised is easier to control. A people who feel hopeless are more likely to depend on the state. Meanwhile, Starmer's failure on the international stage is adding fuel to the fire. Britain was once a country that led the world. Now, under Starmer, it's a country that waits to see what the United States does before making a move. Ukraine is being left hanging in the balance, and if Britain fails to act decisively, the consequences will be far-reaching. What's Labour's response to these glaring issues? More bureaucracy, more taxes, and more excuses. Their answer to declining birth rates? Nothing. Their answer to the small boats crisis? Nothing. Their answer to collapsing industries? Tax them harder. And the Conservatives? No better. They had 14 years to prove they were different. Instead, they betrayed the very voters who trusted them to stand up for Britain. This is why Farage refuses to back down. He knows the stakes are too high. If Britain doesn't reclaim its pride, ambition, and optimism, it will fall into permanent decline. The establishment will call this fear-mongering, but deep down, they know he's right. The real question now is, will the British people wake up in time?